Hey there, Nginx here. In this video, I would like to talk a little bit about the HTML5 audio player, and specifically how it doesn't work in development when you're using Jekyll. And Jekyll is a static site generator. The site that we're looking at right now is the Running in Production podcast site, and it does use Jekyll. And right now we're on localhost port 4000. So if I go to my terminal here, that is what Jekyll is serving. So this is basically, how I develop this site. And if I click around to different podcast episodes, we can see that things are changing. If I go to the home page, everything is good to go. However, the problem comes now when I want to start playing with the audio player. So in this case, it won't even let me click it. And if I do a hard reload on the page, sometimes it lets me click it. And there we go. It's it just stopped on its own after 3 seconds. And if I click to somewhere over here, I'm just going to lower the volume on that. It just bounces me back to the beginning. And, it becomes a little bit tricky to test these audio features if the browsers that you want to use in development, such as Chrome and Firefox, they both don't work. That's kind of a problem. So I have these other custom features in on the page here, like the show notes. I spend a lot of time making these show notes because I want to make it as easy as possible for folks to jump around in the podcast to find some interesting things. So if someone really wants to know about this Kubernetes cluster that's running on 40 DigitalOcean servers, they can click the 2057 and, that sends you right to 2057 in the podcast. But if I click play there, it just bounces you back to the beginning. Apparently, and I don't know the exact details on this, but the web server that Jekyll is using called WebRick, it doesn't send a keep alive header, I guess, and browsers don't really understand what to do, so it just gets reset or whatever. I don't know if that's the exact scientific thing, but I did do a quick Googling beforehand, and that's basically the gist of it. Now, there's other features too that I have, and by the way, this is the default audio player. So if I jump over to Firefox here, you can see this one looks a lot different. And, the implementation of this, if I go to Vim here and I go to the layout for my podcast here and I take a look here. Yeah, so it's basically, I broke it up into 2 lines, but it's essentially just a one-liner. It's the audio tag. I have a couple of little classes attached to it and some, episode information, but ultimately it's basically just one HTML element. And, every single browser is going to make it a little bit different. But what's really interesting is I have Microsoft Edge here. And if I go to here and actually play this, you're listening to the Running in Production podcast. Let me just mute it completely. Well, I'll keep it real low. No, I'll mute it. But you can see how it's playing. Let me just zoom in even a little bit more. 12 seconds, 13, 14. If I click here, it just continues to play. And now I just muted it for good. But you can see it's 35, 43, 44. If I go down here and click the 847, I guess in fact that didn't work in Microsoft Edge. Maybe these are little things I need to iron out, but I could have sworn that was working before I recorded the video. And I swear, if I actually go to runninginproduction.com, and I play that here, so this is the live website, right? No longer the local server. And if I click 343 or something, yeah, it actually works. So maybe I did some last minute messing around on my JavaScript that broke that functionality. But in any case, that's not important. This video is all about how do we actually get this to work locally to where you can actually, debug problems like this if you're using Jekyll. So let me just go back to Vim here and I will go over some steps that you'll need to do. So basically, it's going to boil down to serving the site with Nginx locally instead of using Jekyll. But that's not going to be as crazy as it sounds, because if you're using Docker, it's basically going to come down to running one Docker command and making one little small change to your Jekyll config file, and you'll be good to go. So inside of your Jekyll config, mine's named _config.dev because I actually load 2 configs, and this one basically overrides a couple of values. But in your case, you're probably going to have this URL property. This is an official Jekyll property. And you usually would typically set this to be your domain name, like runninginproduction.com. But in development, it would be localhost port 4000. So what we need to do, first of all, is get rid of the port 4000 for both of these. Well, in my case, it's both because I have the second property here to set the URL path for the MP3s, because ultimately Nginx is going to be serving this over port 80 instead of 4000. So that is change number 1. Change number 2, we will need to restart Jekyll for that, by the way. Change number 2 is not really a change. It's so much like the second step. So all I'm doing here is I'm running a Docker container using the official Nginx image, and I'm just telling it to publish port 80. Let me just bump up the font a little bit bigger so these volume lines are kind of, yeah, there we go. It's a little bit better. So there's 2 different volume lines here. The first volume line is going to volume mount the PWD, which is basically the current working directory, that's this running in production directory, into /app on the container. And the second volume mount here is volume mounting in a Nginx config file called local.conf, which is also in here, and we'll take a look at that in a second. And that is volume mounting it over to the default config file that the Nginx image sets up for you. Basically, we're just overwriting that default config with our local.config. And I can just open that up really quick. We can take a look here. It's not super important to go over this in massive detail. This is all Nginx stuff, and for the most part, you can just basically copy paste this and drop this into your setup and it will work fine. In this case, I do have it inside an _Nginx folder, local.conf. Technically, you could put this anywhere you want, but if you do change the path for that, then you will need to change this volume path on the left, right? This is like the local reference on the left-hand side. So going back to here, it's a very, very basic Nginx setup. Like, this is not meant for production. This is just meant for developing locally. Like, we're telling Nginx to listen on port 80 for the root. So it is using /app/_site. This is a Jekyll thing. So Jekyll has this _site directory, and inside of this directory is basically, Jekyll takes all of your templates and compiles out everything into static HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files, and that's all inside of the site directory. So we need to tell Nginx to serve that. The index here is set to index.html. That's like the default entry point to the site. Like if someone were to not put in, / like foo or something like that as a URL. And then we're using some Nginx location here for the root location. It's basically just going to try to load things in a specific order. I'm not going to get into the gory details of that because that is like a 15-minute conversation on Nginx. Maybe I'll do some future videos on Nginx in the future. If you want that, let me know in the comments. But now, let me just run this Docker container here. And it's going to look like nothing happens here, but this is just Nginx running in the foreground. And when we visit the site in a browser, it is going to start outputting log files here. So now what I'm going to do is, instead of, like, this still works, by the way, like Jekyll is still running its local development server, but I'm going to kill out the port 4000 and just go straight to localhost. So now the version of the site that we're looking at is being served from Nginx, and we can verify that because now we see all these nice, nicely unformatted logs. And, now if I go to play this, go back in for the server side of that, how does that?
Like for our test environment.
Yeah, so it works. I just muted it because, I don't want to overwrite all the audio, but you can see that it's jumping like 436, like 37, 38, like it's working completely fine. And if I click here, it just starts playing like just as you would expect it to. And if I jump down here to 257, it just starts at 257 and continues onwards. And things are working great. And if I go to Firefox and reload the page, also need to kill the port 4000, right, to view the Nginx version of it. Let me mute it, but you can see like now suddenly everything is working, like the counter is going up. So that's really cool. So now I'm actually in a position to be able to change the audio player from the default one to a custom one. So right now this is actually something in the works here. Like a while ago, I put up this issue here just saying like, hey, if anyone wants to take a shot at creating a nice audio player, go for it. And after a while, Alex over here, he did take a shot and he made one that it looks pretty cool. So actually, I want to take a quick look at that. And this is like essential, having it work in local development to be able to test a custom audio player. It's going to be a lot more involved than just like a simple, one-line audio element that you add. So let me just check out, what's this branch? I think it's Alex something. What happened here? Local changes. Okay. Well, I'm going to go back to this here and just undo those changes really quick. Then, by the way, I'm using get fugitive here to run these git commands. There we go. Now, let me kill that. So I am in a new branch here, this Alex branch. I'm just going to restart Jekyll and also restart the Docker container once Jekyll comes up here. Just want to give Jekyll a chance here to rebuild the files into that sites folder. Come on, Jekyll, do your thing. There we go. Rerun the same exact Docker command, no edits needed. And if I go back to here and I do a full reload, of course it's going to throw an error 404 because I'm making a video. How did that happen? Oh, yes, I'm viewing podcast episode 9, whereas this branch only goes up to podcast episode 6. So he made this pull request, like a month ago is when it started. Okay, there we go. Let me reload that so things actually load up. And what we're looking at here is a completely custom audio player. And maybe I can do maybe a separate video on basically creating a custom audio player. I think that would be interesting and doesn't really need to be related to Jekyll. But you can see here, I personally think this one's a little bit nicer than the default one. It's a lot easier. Like this bar is much larger. It has some extra features, like the most important one, which is really the whole reason why I want this. I guess I can keep it at a low volume for now. But check this out. I'm playing this.
Simple. Like all the complex, interesting things are in the Electron app. That anytime I needed to add functionality, I just push a new
there we go.
production, which would be
so
more
now
dangerous.
It's playing at 2x speed. So you're able to actually change the speed of the audio just by clicking this a couple of times, which I think is really nice. And another pretty cool feature is this little icon here, which says like click to copy current time. So if I just click that, it copies the URL with the current time. And if I go to, different browser, it doesn't really matter. Like let's say I'm, emailing this to my friend now. Now it has a timestamp of 1807 in the URL. And now look at that. It just immediately loaded up at 1807. So it's very easy now to share links to specific points to the podcast, which I think is a really cool feature. That was one thing that I put in my GitHub issue there as like a nice to have. And then Alex nailed it. So right now we just need to iron out a couple things about the mobile view of this, and basically just rigorously test it in a whole bunch of different browser versions. But in any case, we are now in a position to where, we can actively develop this locally. And really, it wasn't that bad. It was just basically running one Docker command to run Nginx. And I made this very, very, very small config file for Nginx, right? This local config file. Yeah, so that was it. So on that note, I hope this helps you out if you're using Jekyll in development and you also have an audio player. I don't know if this would be a problem with a video player. Maybe it would be. So I imagine this type of fix would work for both. And on that note, thanks a lot for watching. I know this was kind of a long one, and I will see you in the next video.